Have you ever been close to someone, emotionally close, but when things started to turn physical, you felt yourself quietly pulling back? Not dramatically, not with fear, just a subtle distance. You enjoy the connection, the conversations, the comfort of being understood. But when sex becomes part of the equation, it doesn't spark excitement. It feels neutral, maybe even like something you could live without. And sometimes that realization brings a quiet wave of confusion, because everywhere you look, desire is treated like a given. Movies assume it. Friends joke about it. Relationships are built around it. It's framed as basic, instinctive, universal. So when you don't feel that same drive, you start questioning yourself. Am I repressed? Am I broken? Why does this matter so much to everyone else, but not to me? Here's what most people don't talk about. Disliking sex, or simply not craving it, isn't automatically a flaw. It's often a psychological pattern, a nervous system response, a story your body learned long before you ever tried to explain it with words. And once we stop treating it like a defect, we can start asking a more useful question. What shaped it? Because when you look beneath the surface, this isn't random at all. It has roots. If we really want to understand why someone might dislike sex, we have to zoom out, because this rarely starts in adulthood. It usually starts much earlier, in the way closeness first felt. Think about childhood for a moment, not the dramatic events, just the emotional climate. Was affection natural in your home? Were hugs casual and warm? Could you express discomfort without being dismissed? Did vulnerability feel safe? Or did it feel like something you had to manage carefully? This is where attachment begins shaping everything. If someone develops a secure attachment style, closeness tends to feel steady. Intimacy doesn't threaten their sense of self. Emotional and physical connection can coexist without overwhelming the nervous system. But if someone leans toward an avoidant attachment style, the story can look very different. Avoidant patterns often form in environments where emotional needs weren't consistently met. Maybe caregivers were loving but distant. Maybe independence was praised while vulnerability was subtly discouraged. Maybe expressing need felt uncomfortable. Over time, the child adapts. They learn to rely on themselves. They minimize their own needs. They associate closeness with subtle loss of control. And here's the part people overlook. Sex is one of the most vulnerable forms of closeness. It requires surrender, exposure, being seen in a way that bypasses logic and goes straight to the body. If your system learned that vulnerability equals risk, your body may not interpret sex as pleasure first. It may interpret it as intrusion, not in a dramatic way, just in a quiet tightening. A feeling of wanting space afterward, a subtle emotional shutdown. That's not coldness, that's protection. Now on the other side, someone with an anxious attachment style may experience something more complicated. For them, sex can become reassurance, proof of being wanted, a way to temporarily calm fear of abandonment. But if that reassurance doesn't fully soothe the deeper insecurity, desire can start feeling unstable, intense at times, avoidant at others. It becomes tangled with fear rather than grounded in safety. And sometimes, it's not even about attachment in the clinical sense. Sometimes it's modeling. If you grew up in a home where affection was rare, where touch felt awkward, or where sex was framed as shameful or never discussed at all, your nervous system may simply categorize sexuality as unfamiliar territory. You can't feel at ease with something that was never normalized. Then there's the biological layer, and this part matters more than people realize. Inside your brain, there's a constant conversation happening between logic and emotion. The prefrontal cortex helps you think, reason, and evaluate. The amygdala scans for threat and emotional intensity. For some people, when intimacy escalates, the amygdala becomes slightly more active, not because sex is dangerous, but because vulnerability activates emotional exposure. When that happens, stress chemistry can rise. Cortisol increases. The body shifts subtly into alert mode. And when the body feels alert, it doesn't prioritize desire. Desire thrives in safety. It softens in calm. It opens in trust. If someone is living under chronic stress, work pressure, unresolved anxiety, emotional overload. Libido often decreases naturally. The nervous system is focused on survival, not pleasure. Dopamine also plays a role here. Dopamine drives anticipation and reward. If someone's dopamine response to sexual stimuli is naturally lower, they may not experience the same craving others described. It's not repression. It's simply a different calibration of the reward system. And then we need to gently acknowledge something else. For some people, disinterest in sex isn't rooted in attachment wounds or stress chemistry at all. It's orientation. Some individuals exist on the asexual spectrum. Their lack of desire isn't avoidance. It isn't fear. It's simply their baseline wiring. Human sexuality isn't one uniform drive. It's a spectrum of experiences. When you start layering all of this together, early emotional conditioning, attachment patterns, nervous system sensitivity, dopamine response, chronic stress, orientation, you begin to see something clearly. Disliking sex is rarely random. It's usually a logical outcome of how your system learned to define safety, reward, and closeness. And once you understand that, the question shifts. It's no longer, why am I like this? It becomes, what shaped this response? And that's where the conversation gets deeper. Because beyond the root causes, there's something else we have to untangle. The story society tells about people who don't fit the expected script. Once you understand the roots, something else starts to stand out. The real struggle for many people who dislike sex isn't just the feeling itself. It's the way the world reacts to it. Because society has a very specific script about desire. It assumes it's constant. It assumes it's universal. It assumes that if it's not there, something must be missing. And that's where the misconceptions begin. One of the most common ones is this: you just haven't met the right person yet. It sounds harmless, even hopeful. But underneath that statement is an assumption. That desire is a switch waiting to be flipped by the right chemistry. For some people, that might be true. But for others, attraction doesn't suddenly transform their baseline wiring. Emotional connection can grow. Trust can deepen. Love can become steady and meaningful. And still, sexual desire remains low or neutral. That doesn't mean the relationship is fake. It doesn't mean the person is incapable of love. It just means their experience of intimacy isn't driven by sexual urgency. Another misconception is the idea that people who dislike sex must be repressed, as if they're secretly full of desire but too ashamed to admit it. But repression usually comes with internal conflict, intrusive thoughts, guilt, tension around impulses. Many people who simply don't crave sex don't experience that kind of turmoil. They feel more confused by society's expectations than by their own internal state. Then there's the assumption that trauma must be the cause. And while trauma can absolutely shape sexual desire, it's not the automatic explanation. Reducing every low libido experience to trauma can unintentionally create more shame. It frames the person as damaged instead of simply different. There's also a misunderstanding between low libido, sexual aversion, and asexual identity. Low libido can fluctuate with stress, hormones, or relationship dynamics. Sexual aversion often involves discomfort or anxiety. Asexuality, for many, is not distressing at all. It's just an orientation. When these distinctions get blurred, people start diagnosing themselves with problems that might not exist. But here's where it gets more complicated. Even if there's nothing wrong, living in a world that prioritizes sex can create pressure, and pressure changes behavior. Someone who dislikes sex may agree to it out of obligation. They may convince themselves they should want it. They may disconnect from their body to get through it. Over time, that can create resentment, emotional distance, a quiet sense of performing rather than participating. Or they may go the opposite direction, withdraw entirely, avoiding romantic relationships to escape expectation. Not because they dislike connection, but because they're tired of negotiating something that doesn't come naturally. The cost isn't the lack of desire. The cost is misunderstanding it. When you don't understand your own pattern, you start labeling yourself unfairly. You call yourself cold, difficult, broken, immature. But when you see the psychology clearly, something shifts. You realize this isn't a moral failure. It's a nervous system pattern interacting with a culture that expects something else. And that tension between internal wiring and external expectation, is where relationships start to feel complicated, which brings us to the next layer. Because this doesn't just live inside a person, it shows up in how they connect with others. When someone dislikes sex, it doesn't just stay in their private thoughts. It slowly shapes how they move inside relationships. In friendships, they often feel completely at ease. They may be emotionally deep, thoughtful, loyal. They value conversation, shared humor, intellectual connection. Physical intimacy simply isn't the currency they use to measure closeness. But in romantic relationships, the dynamic can get more complicated. If their partner equates sex with love, reassurance, or bonding, a quiet mismatch can form. One person may feel, if we're not intimate, something is wrong. The other may feel, why does this one thing define everything? And neither person is necessarily wrong. They're just speaking different emotional languages. Someone who dislikes sex may show love in ways that aren't always recognized. Acts of service, long conversations, quiet presence, consistency. They may be deeply committed, but not physically expressive. Sometimes they unconsciously choose partners with lower libido because it feels safer, less negotiation, less pressure. Other times, they choose highly affectionate partners, hoping connection will spark desire, and when it doesn't, guilt quietly grows. You might notice small patterns. They delay physical escalation in dating. They prefer emotional bonding first, sometimes indefinitely. They feel relief in long-distance relationships where emotional connection is emphasized over physical presence. And during intimacy, if it happens, they may feel detached, not distressed, just not fully engaged, as if their mind is present but their body is neutral. Over time, if this pattern isn't understood, it can create internal conflict. They might ask themselves, why can't I want this the way my partner does? Or worse, am I depriving them of something essential? That's where the red flags start to show up internally. Feeling dread before intimacy, agreeing out of obligation rather than desire, feeling disconnected afterward. But there are green flags too, signs of psychological alignment. Being able to talk openly about boundaries, choosing partners who respect differences in desire, understanding your own baseline without labeling it as defective. The difference between suffering and stability often isn't the level of desire, it's the level of clarity. When both people understand what's happening, intimacy can be negotiated in a way that feels respectful. When it's misunderstood, it turns into quiet resentment on both sides. And this is where the conversation gently shifts. Because once you recognize how this pattern affects relationships, the question becomes, what do you do with that awareness? Once you see the pattern clearly, the goal isn't to force yourself into a different shape. It's to understand the shape you already have. If someone dislikes sex, the first shift isn't behavioral. It's internal. It's learning to notice what your body actually feels without rushing to judge it. There's a difference between tension and neutrality, between anxiety and simple lack of desire, between I don't want this and I feel like I should want this. That distinction matters because a lot of confusion doesn't come from desire itself. It comes from pressure layered on top of it. Another important layer is clarifying your baseline. Some people experience fluctuating libido depending on stress, hormones, or emotional closeness. Others have a consistently low or absent drive. When you don't know your own baseline, every relationship feels like a test you might be failing. But when you understand, this is how my system tends to operate, the narrative softens. It stops being a mystery. It becomes information. There's also a quiet reframing that changes everything. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? You begin asking, what does intimacy mean to me? For some people, intimacy is physical closeness. For others, it's emotional transparency. For others, it's shared experiences and intellectual depth. Sex is one form of intimacy. It is not the only form. When you widen that definition, you start seeing your relationships differently. You notice how you give love, how you receive it, where you feel connected, where you feel distant. None of this is about forcing desire, and it's not about rejecting it either. It's about alignment between your nervous system and your choices. alignment between your identity and your relationships, alignment between what you feel and what you agree to. When those pieces start matching, shame tends to decrease. And that's really what this entire conversation has been about. We've looked at attachment patterns, early emotional modeling, brain chemistry, dopamine and stress, cultural pressure, relationship dynamics, and underneath all of it is one simple truth. Disliking sex isn't random. It isn't automatically dysfunction. It's a pattern shaped by experience, wiring, and meaning. Once you see it, you stop fighting yourself. You start understanding yourself. And awareness like that doesn't force change overnight, but it changes how you move. If any part of this felt familiar, you're not alone in it. Understanding yourself is never about becoming someone else. It's about finally seeing the pattern clearly and realizing it was never chaos to begin with.